Where the heck is the master of Kung Fu and friendship been? Well, wow, is that ever a long story. From the mountains of Nepal to the forests of Brazil. Well, I didn't go to any of those. But I did do a lot of writing and consuming of stories, and I've lived to tell the tale. So let's talk about the lessons I've learned and what's in store for the Worldbuilding Dojo. I'm author DC Ferguson, and this is my summer vacation. So, before we get started, I just want to let you guys know that if you like the channel, throw the Master of Kung Fu and Friendship some love and sign up for my newsletter. You'll get updates on what I've been working on both in books and on the channel, and every newsletter has links to some really cool authors you should know about. The link is in the description box down below. As I'm sure you're all very well aware, the Master of Kung Fu and Friendship is an avid film buff. I love movies. How much do you love movies, DC? Well, guy who talks to your monitor, there is a pretty complete list here of every film that I've watched in the theater since the last time we gathered around the flames of YouTube to wax on world building. So, as you can see, that is quite a list. I'm pretty sure that's all of them. I watched some movies on Netflix and whatnot, but the theater experience is very different. There's some classics in there, which, yeah, the theater experience is why I went. I never saw The Matrix in theaters, for example, and it's not a gigantically different film, but it is larger than life in a theater. So, what does the current slew of summer offerings this year teach us about modern world building? Well, I could easily do a series of reviews on these films from a world building standpoint, but I'm not a movie critic. Instead, let's talk about some highs and lows from the films I've watched. Relax, no spoiler warnings are necessary for any of these. So let's first talk about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Referring back to our video here, this exemplifies how important it is to use dialogue to reveal character traits and personality, establish relationships, and move a narrative forward. Watching a Quentin Tarantino film is a masterclass in building around smart, believable dialogue and mounting a climax, and this movie was no exception. Now, for It, Chapter 2, this goes back to something I've been telling you guys for a while. With It Chapter 2, an important lesson is driven home. Anyone that has ever read this book knows the second half, the adult half of the book, is a weaker, less compelling story of the two, and it actually falls pretty flat in the climax. It is precisely because this movie is so faithful to the book that this film just isn't as good as the first one. No amount of great acting, CGI, atmosphere, or sets can make up for poor story crafting. You have to have a climax to your tale that both satisfies and closes the door. And that brings us to Gemini Man. I have to admit, I went into this film flatly convinced I should have low expectations. The plot's main conceit is the exact same one as Metal Gear. I mean, literally the same. That said, you have a very satisfying action film here. The sidekick role played by Mary Elizabeth Winstead is the farthest thing from a damsel in distress you've ever seen. The acting is pretty tight with some great star power, and the movie is really enjoyable, even if the CGI on young Will Smith isn't quite up to the de-aging of a Marvel movie. I was actually impressed how much I enjoyed this movie. And that finally would bring us to Ad Astra. I saw this the day before I saw Gemini Man, and my reaction was the polar opposite. I went in with high expectations from Brad Pitt and Tommy Lee Jones, and I can't remember walking out of a film feeling so disappointed in such a long time. There are so many lessons to be learned with this film, we might just do a when it's done wrong video, but I'll tell you the most important takeaway. A lot of you out there are sci-fi and fantasy writers and fans. Recalling this video, you have to know that you can play hard and fast with the rules of magic in your world. You even have some play with future technology. The one thing that you cannot do is make a story that seems like hard sci-fi and then have a third act that is dependent on the audience not having any clue what the laws of physics are. Some rules are just not meant to be broken, folks. So, those are a couple of things that I have been noticing, but there's something more. There's this alarming trend, and we're going to be talking about it in the next video on criticism. But there's this bizarre disconnect going on right now. The gulf between critics and the audience is the widest I've ever seen. Now, I know critics have always been snobby fans of movies you've never heard of and hate summer popcorn films, but this is ridiculous now. When 3 out of 4 critics will tell you a movie is bad and 9 out of 10 friends will tell you that it was awesome, there's something wrong. Criticism is an incredibly important tool, even when it may be limited to that 1 out of 10 dentists that doesn't love this new toothbrush. Their take, while subjective, may have a nugget of truth to it. Hearing constructive criticism is vitally important, not only for us to grow as storytellers, but to point to pitfalls and missteps our fellow artists are making and examine why something didn't work. For an audience to be so accepting of a piece of work and enjoy it so much, it's just plain weird when a large majority of critics come along and dump all over it. It devalues their opinion, and in so doing, shuts down criticism. And as I said, this is an alarming trend that needs to stop, but we're going to get into that in the next video. For those of you wondering, I do actually refer to films as moving pictures and books as wordy words. Speaking of which, I read a bunch, but most importantly, I wrote some. The Dragon's Dream Saga Book 4, Spirits Unbound, released on August 6th. And releasing on November 5th is Shadows of Olympus, Book 5 of the Dragon's Dream Saga. Now, shameless plugs aside, there's a number of lessons to talk about with writing these 2 books. One aspect, criticism, will be featured in the next video, which I mentioned earlier. But let's get to some stuff we can explore. Now, writing on a long series, for example the Dragon's Dream Saga, which I intended for 8 books, can be a serious juggling act. Gone are the days where you can have single, bite-sized adventures with no ramifications on the status quo of the universe. Homer can't go to space and then come back to work and have a normal life the next episode. So, you end up serving a lot of masters that you've created. The interconnectedness of your world becomes dependent on the rules you set before it, the events that have taken place, and this is the big one, the ramifications that will happen in the future of your world. So take, for example, the opening chapters of Spirits Unbound. Our main character, Cora Blake, is once again dealing with the loss of a loved one. She's in a very bad place when she journeys to the free state of Texas and goes looking for a sheriff she needs to aid her. Now, you don't need the context of having read all my books to understand this, though it'd sure be awesome if you did, but I digress. What we have is a protagonist starting a new book at the lowest point she's ever been. She's depressed and she feels trapped in this war with the dragon Lucius. Someone on her team recently died, and when a new member of her team disappears, Cora's life becomes wrapped around saving him at any cost. She becomes desperate, throwing herself recklessly into danger. There was no shying away from this storyline going into the next book. Cora has become nihilistic, depressed, filled with grief and loss, and this desire to just give up her war after the events of Book 4, and that's where we start Book 5. Remember, we've discussed this so many times before, your character, your main character, will always be the one that transforms the most from beginning to end. Now, if we look at the hero's journey through episodes, let's use Cora and a few pop culture heroes. At the start of Book 1, Project Phoenix, Cora is a well-trained, plucky 24-year-old thrown into a situation much bigger than her. But that's also true of Thomas Anderson in The Matrix and Luke Skywalker in A New Hope. But if we look at later episodes, we still see they're undergoing the most change of any character. Our other characters, such as Trinity or Han Solo, follow story arcs as supporting characters, which don't tie up until the final episode. So, for example, when we check in with Luke at the start of Empire Strikes Back, he's settling into this role as a member of the Rebel Alliance. By the end, he's beginning to see his destiny intertwined with our big evil, and when he challenges him, he falls short. Great revelations that Vader or his father are setting the stage for the final arc of the story, but when you look over toward Han Solo, we find him imperiled by Vader with a to be continued on his story arc. Do you see the difference? So, one of the big draws for me to write this series was that I knew every book I'd be reinventing myself. Project Phoenix was an action thriller, while Heaven's Crest pumped the brakes and developed Cora's powers. The Pendragon Codex dug deeper into the mystery surrounding Cora's war with Lucius, and it was also a team-building, heist-style book informed by films like The Italian Job and Ocean's 11. Spirits Unbound was a bit of suspense horror. My latest, Shadows of Olympus, leaves the high tech of 2082 behind as Cora is thrown back in time. In each book, I'm changing up the narrative tone and pace while trying to remain true to the characters and just plain tell an awesome story. Each one, of course, takes my main character and reinvents her as well. So, tempered by the fires of change in 5 books, who she's going to be going into book 6 will be a very different person from the one she is in Project Phoenix, but not so changed that she's not recognizable anymore. So, I brought all this up to say that I'm practicing what I preach. Every episode of the Worldbuilding Dojo is lessons I've learned by both seeing and doing. And when I've broken guidelines, either by mistake or design, it was either a colossal failure or super avant-garde if it actually worked. In order to tell a satisfying tale, we need these compelling characters, story arcs, world building, magic and tech systems, and most importantly, a critical eye. That eye, the lens you view your work and others' work through, is the best tool you can make yourself be the best you can. This is actually going to be our episode 3 this season, because we're going to go in a direction of some more advanced parts of storytelling. We're also going to be delving into advanced world building techniques. As I'm sure you can tell, we're no longer talking basics anymore. You darn kids grow up so fast. Character dynamics are essentially the way the characters in your world bounce off of each other, much in the same way that we have a friend that we talk to one way and another person that we talk to a different way, such as a client or a customer. The interpersonal relationships of characters is the fulcrum where good characters elevate to great, believable, fully realized people. Once again, I'd point to our man Quentin Tarantino and how his every single film is a dialogue-driven masterclass in turning characters into people, and watching his films really inform me on what greatness looks like. So, it should come as no surprise that he heavily influenced that wit and brilliance I wanted to see in my own characters. One lesson that I've learned from my little summer vacation is how important knowing your characters really is. I've said it before, sit down and literally interview your characters. See what comes out of their mouths. Sometimes the answer will surprise you. I do recall one particularly lovely night. I knew I had arrived at a point in the story I was super excited about. I really wanted to write this. Now, obviously, no spoilers, but my outline for the chapter basically said, Cora meets her antagonist and they argue. Now, this is the 5th book we're talking about. These two characters know each other very well. So this isn't going to be generic heroine A confronts villain of the week B. Instead, this was going to be like a bitter married couple fighting over who gets what in the divorce. I can't tell you how excited I was to get there after the events of everything that happened in book 5 and just see what happens. I had no plan, just this single line direction I gave myself. It was one of the highlights of my writing career to see these two bouncing off of each other. She gets upset, he responds in anger, she makes a demand, he cedes ground. It was like dancing, and I had no idea what direction the conversation would unfold until I built a bridge to the end of the chapter where we'd go into the next one. This kind of chemistry is so rare to find in storytelling, and I say take it where you can get it. With so many incredible films I've seen this summer, one of the few to actually get this part right that wasn't a Tarantino movie was Avengers Endgame. While being an absolute love letter to anyone that stuck through 21 movies to get there, every character had their own voice. But most importantly, they had their own distinct relationship with other characters. Look at the way that, say, Captain America bounces off Tony Stark, with this undercurrent of respect, mistrust, caution, and camaraderie, versus his relationship with Black Widow, which is softer, caring, the best friend for a romance that never was. There's great subtlety there, thanks to some really smart screenwriting. I can't imagine what a daunting task it must have been to juggle writing some 50 characters into a single story, have them all wearing the wounds and victories of their previous stories, and interacting with each other in a way that felt natural, and still tell a cohesive narrative. At that point, the multi-million-dollar CGI action scenes sound like the easiest part, right? Wow, it has been a long hiatus. But with my batteries recharged, it's time to get back to talking the craft as much as I love writing it. I can always use a hand, though. Leave a message in the comments. Let me know what kind of topics you want to see covered in future videos. Don't be shy either. 2 of our previous videos were brought to you by the request of subscribers. As a reminder, don't forget that there's a link at the bottom there in the description box to my newsletter, and feel free to write back. I love hearing from fans and talking shop. Plus, you get to hear all the latest goings on with the Dragon's Dream saga. So don't forget to like and subscribe to hear about new videos. And as always, I'm DC Ferguson. Now have fun and get crafting.